Presented by McDonald's of Glasgow, it's time for the Brown Sports Bag from the heart of the Barrens, a weekly local sports machine. Alongside John Butler, here's your host, James Brown.
Well, John, we're back again this week. Talk a little bit about some basketball. We're going to cover some high school basketball, a little bit of college basketball. Talk about the Super Bowl because that's coming up on this coming Sunday.
Is it?
Hooray. Yeah, shocking. Man, you know, without all the media availability and all that stuff, it is so weird, this 2-week gap, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of seems normal.
Yeah, it is.
Like a normal game.
It is a normal game. I mean, when everybody says just pretend like it's any other game, and usually you got all the theatrics around the Super Bowl and it doesn't feel that way, it does this time. But we'll get to that here in the second segment. And then at the end of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about Hank Aaron and some other things related to baseball. And but let's start off with the, I guess, big games from Friday night. That was the first meeting of the season between Barron County and Glasgow, and that in its own right felt strange. I mean, it was the last, 2 days away from the end of January, and they're playing their first game. Usually they had played a month before that.
Kind of surreal in front of a rather sparse crowd.
Yeah.
You know, you would normally say that would be a sparse crowd between Barron and Glasgow in anything you play.
Right? Yeah, I mean, it's usually some outer region girls basketball game draws a crowd about that size, so it is kind of odd to see those two playing each other, and you have 15% capacity. So, I mean, but the crowd was maxed out. It would seem to have been, and as far as how many people could be there, they were all there that could be there, John.
Yeah, I mean, they took in the number that they could, but still sparse compared to normally you had to turn people away. Yeah,
I mean, we've had games, especially I think in the first year Glasgow had their new gym open whenever the capacity was reduced some from the previous gym, and there was a district game played over there, and I remember it was like people were wall to wall in the joint. And it was, it was, a hot box, but that was not the case on Friday night. And in the end, I think what we saw was we saw two games between teams. One team has a little more experience than the other in the girls' game, and strangely enough, that was the case in the boys' game as well. And those two teams seemed to be their basic advantage there, John.
Yeah, I guess Barron has, and girls, we're going to start with girls or boys?
Yeah, we'll start with the girls.
The Barron girls have a little bit more experience. I wouldn't say Barron's overly experienced, but Murphy and Raven Ennis, Katie Murphy and Raven Ennis have big game experience. And,
yeah.
The rest of their players really are very young for the most part. Start one more senior, but for the most part, a lot of the kids are very inexperienced. And Glasgow has Adwell, and other than that, they're inexperienced.
Yeah.
So, yeah, both teams, but that's kind of the lay of the land in girls basketball.
Yeah.
I mean, I said it last week, if you got juniors and seniors, you're the exception.
Mm-hmm.
Most teams are playing with very young players.
Yeah. And the Trojanettes were basically in need of a win because they had suffered 3 losses in a row playing outer region foes. I don't think they've won a game against teams outside of the 4th region so far. So they're taking some lumps out of the 4th region. And the Lady Scotties had taken 10 days off and played over at Monroe County and lost by 20. They kind of looked like a team that had taken 10 days off, to be honest with you.
Yeah, so both teams were hungry for a win.
Yeah.
As you said, Barron coming off 3 straight losses, and really, to be honest with you, have not recovered from the loss of Macy Lockhart.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's pretty clear, how important she is to this team. Not just offensively, but her rebounding, her defense, just her. I think her composure and so forth. They're really kind of missing that second score, So Barron had really, really struggled with Pulaski County early in the week. They lost, I think, 57-35. Went to Casey and lost 37-31. So the impact of Macy Lockhart's loss has been especially on the offensive end. They've really struggled scoring, and Barron got off to a good start against Glasgow.
Mm-hmm.
But, boy, they just kind of midway through early in the third just went through a long drought. I think Barron had it up to like 15-point lead, and Glasgow got it all the way down to 1.
Yeah, and I think they had a couple of possessions with an opportunity to take the lead.
They could. That's exactly right. And then Barron made some shots down the stretch to kind of move it out to that 48-38 win. Raven Ennis had 15, but I think the big one contributor was Katie Murphy. She had 12, and she's not been in double figures much, and she wasn't expected to score much at all last year. She's more the distributor and the defensive player, and Katie is going to have to score some points for this team. That's a critical area. They need some points, and Katie stepped up and played really well. She always plays well defensively, but putting the ball in the basket was important. They pulled out I wouldn't say it was the most visually greatest game I've ever seen, but two teams that fought hard and Barron pulled out a win and 48-38.
Meanwhile, for the Lady Scotties, you mentioned Murphy having to take up the slack on scoring for the Trojanettes. I think Glasgow is still looking for that other player who can hit shots. Now, Mia Cassidy can do it from three-point range, and I think Chloe Hale and Ashton Botts are also capable. But after Adwell, she's being asked to do so much with this particular team because you mentioned Lockhart's injury, but with Glasgow, they had two seniors that decided not to play this season.
It's big. That's a big loss. It's just like an injury.
Yeah, and so that's so much weight on Adwell in that particular setup.
And the other big thing with the Glasgow girls, especially this past week, it's been a problem all year, but this past week it kind of bit them against Monroe and Barron. It's turnovers.
Yeah.
In the loss to Monroe, which I'm not shocked that Monroe beat Glasgow because I've said all along I don't think Monroe does have some talent.
Yeah.
And they do have some good athletes. So that didn't surprise me, but how they beat Glasgow, they beat them handily. And,
they beat them physically and on the scoreboard.
And Glasgow had 21 turnovers, I think, the first half, and ended up with 28. And the turnovers, I think, is the one issue that Coach Pippen has admitted to is probably their biggest problem right now.
Right.
It's not necessarily scoring, but you can't score if you turn it over.
Yeah, you don't have the ball, you can't score.
Exactly right. It's the turnovers, and I think he made a comment, until they fix that problem, it's going to prevent them from beating good teams. Mm-hmm. But I think he's done a good job, though. And that was last week was a tough week for Glasgow, losing those two games.
Yeah. They have Allen County coming up, and then they finish off the week with Caverna. So they have a couple of games I think are winnable games on their schedule for them this week, as long as they avoid the turnovers. I mean, because Allen County and
Allen's playing better.
Yeah, Allen is playing. Speaking of Monroe, I mean, they beat them on Friday night. I really did not see that coming.
Well, Allen's finally scoring a little bit more. Instead of getting in the 30s, now they're up in the high 40s and 50s, and Coach Dunn, since he's been over there, his teams have gradually gotten better as the year has gone on.
Yeah.
And their bugaboo for the last couple of years has been able – last year was scoring.
Yeah.
And this year's the same thing, but it looks like to me they're starting to get a little bit of rhythm and maybe getting a little confidence and so forth. The seeding is set, girls. It doesn't matter what happens. Barron is going to play Allen and Glasgow's going to play Monroe. Mm-hmm. But, I from the Glasgow girls' perspective, I would think they would kind of want to get this turned around a little bit and pick up a win.
Yeah, I'm curious to see. I mean, because it kind of looks like what happens in a couple of games or a couple of games that I've seen that Glasgow's girls ended up losing. They did not have confidence with the ball in the first half, and then once they kind of got into got that confidence, and they played with more poise, and they didn't turn the ball over as much. And it seems like they just have to figure out how to avoid that first half bug that they seem to have.
Yeah, confidence is an interesting thing. How do you get confident? How do you get confidence? Well, you got to get you have to succeed to get confidence, but you can't succeed until you have confidence.
Yeah.
And it's a gradual process, and most teams that struggle handling the ball early in a year tend to get better as the year goes on. It's hard to improve a whole lot in practice. It's a different game when people really get after you and you have better athletes than probably the ones that you're practicing against. And sometimes the more you see defensive pressure, as long as you're mentally tough, you will get better as the year goes on.
Yeah. And speaking of which, I mean, that's probably a bit of a problem that both Barron and Glasgow are having when it comes to the turnover thing, is that practice side. Because neither team has the practice depth experience-wise to be able to actually,
True.
simulate the pressure that's coming out.
But everybody's that way anymore.
That's a good point. It really is.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to play games, to be perfectly honest with you, because I don't know of hardly any girls' teams that have a lot of depth anyway, and that's why you just got to go out and play, and hopefully you get games in. Now, luckily for both Barron and Glasgow, they have so far have been fortunate to stay away from quarantines and COVID issues, so they have been able to play where a lot of teams have not.
Yeah. Meanwhile, on the boys' side, going back to the experience thing, I mean, Glasgow has a good group of juniors. Now, they have one thing. They don't have a whole lot of depth beyond those 6, maybe 7 players. Barron has more depth, and I thought that was a key difference in that game on Friday night. But also, Barron has some players with a little more experience. Even with Aiden Niken out, you still have Tay Pointer and Gavin Withrow, Mason Griggs, Ryan Shirley, who have played in some games the last couple of years.
Yeah, you got to give the Barron guys, a lot of credit, and Coach Cunningham credit. They've won 4 in a row.
Yeah,
and that's not easy to do. They've got it up to 8-3 right now, and that's losing Aiden Niken in the Russell County game, who's one of the best players in this area. And they have found a way to continue on, and a lot of players have kind of stepped up their game. To be honest with you, they had, going back before the Glasgow game, they got a huge win against Central Hardin.
Yeah.
On Tuesday night, 59-58 in overtime, in which they were down 8 with about a minute and a half to go.
Right.
And you lose those 9 out of 10 times, and Gavin Withrow has really picked up his game. He had 15 points, he had several threes. He had 15 against them. He had 13 against Glasgow, and he's shooting the ball better and playing well right now. Ryan Shirley is the one that's really impressed me. He had 20 against Glasgow, and I think 8 rebounds, and he had 13, I think, against Central Hardin. And he's always done the little things well. And he's probably their best defender. And he always plays hard, but he's really starting to score now. And when you combine Shirley and Aiden Miller, and of course you have Mason Griggs is playing well, and Tay Pointer only had 3 points against Central Hardin, but it was the 3 to send it in overtime.
Right.
So they've kind of got that gained a little confidence this past 2 weeks, and the Barron County boys are playing well, and they got a good win against Glasgow. It's hard fought, 65-58. They're always hard fought, when they play together, when you play Glasgow. And it was, again, a lot of fouls and things like that were called, but you got to give Barron credit for pulling out a tough game.
Yeah. I kind of figured going into the game the actual depth that Barron County has, just the ability to put people on the floor who will do things. You mentioned Aiden Miller. There wasn't probably a whole lot expected of him coming into the year other than playing behind Niken in a lot of situations and learning how to be a better basketball player as a sophomore. And so, he's come along. I think he did well, played inside against Glasgow, caused them some problems size-wise because Glasgow just doesn't really have any size, physical size to match up with him.
Well, Aiden's physical. He's close to 6'4".
Yeah.
Left-handed, too, strong kid. Of course, his dad was a really good player here back in the late 1990s, Mike Miller. Mm-hmm. And his mother was a really good player at Monroe County.
Really?
Yeah. Played for Coach Harlan and won a region back in, I think, 96.
Yeah.
So he's got some family bloodlines going through him.
Right.
And but I think the coaches felt all along that he could be a good player.
Yeah.
How much time he, with Aiden Niken and some others had to work his way into it, but I think all along they felt like that he was going to have a good year. Mm-hmm. Being left-handed, I think, is a huge advantage, especially for post player and so forth. I just think you can get your shots. There's teams are just naturally. You can tell somebody they're left-handed all day long, and right. For some reason players forget it.
Yeah.
And but he's played well.
Well, and on the flip side of that, I thought Sam Bowling had a good game against Barron. He did everything you would expect.
He's a good player.
He really is.
He's 6'4", 6'5", and he plays hard. I like how he plays. He plays hard. He doesn't talk a lot. He just goes out there and he plays.
Can score from just about anywhere on the floor.
He can. He has a really neat game about him, and he's a tough matchup. He can play for a lot of teams.
Yeah. He played well against Barron in that game. Like I said, I thought the key difference was just the fatigue effect as the game goes on with the depth. And after you lose 7 seniors, yes, you have a good group of juniors here for Glasgow, but they still have to learn how to play at the level and intensity necessary, even in a game against Barron, because a game against Barron might as well be a playoff game even in the regular season.
Well, they're going to play the boys' district is set, too. It's going to be Barron and Glasgow.
Right. They'll see each other again and again in a regular season game.
That's correct, because Glasgow went over and beat Monroe on Tuesday night 60-50, and that kind of sealed that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Jackson Poland had a good game over there. I think he had 19 points.
Yeah. He had 17 in the second quarter, I think it was.
Big quarter, to say the least.
They got the district win, Glasgow did, over at Monroe, which set up the matchup. It didn't matter who won the game on Friday. They were already going to be the 2-3.
I think the consensus is, especially after losing Niken, is that Allen is probably the favorite.
Yeah.
So it's probably best that if you ask Barron, Glasgow, and Monroe, they probably none of them wanted to play Allen the first round,
right?
Especially with Mr. Shirley over there at Allen, right. who sends to play his best basketball when he needs to.
Yeah. Real quick, let's look at the fourth region outside of the district itself, as we just talked about. Interesting score from Friday night was South Warren girls beat Warren Central girls. I did not see that coming. I think we had already talked about this. I feel like Warren Central's a team, their girls' team is going to win, 18, 20 games maybe.
And they're not going to get that many in.
Well, they're not going to get that many in probably.
That's right. They've only got 4.
Yeah, but when you got to the end, you still weren't going to be sure whether or not they were good as their record, because they have just some better talent than some people that are going to play.
They do, but COVID has really affected the Bowling Green schools.
It has.
They just, they play, they stop, and they play, and what people don't realize, it's not – when they stop, it's not like they're stop playing games. They can't even practice.
Yeah.
And still the wild card, the team that's still in my mind the favorite is Bowling Green. And they've got their point guard is now back. She played for the first time last week against E-Town.
Mm-hmm.
So she's back, and that's a huge help for them. And, of course, because
they lost that game like 38-31.
38-31 on the road, yeah.
What a grind.
Yeah, but Jones is they still have Jones, Tisdale, and the point guard who who tore ACL last year is back. That will really help them.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you right now, especially with Lockhart out for Barron. They kind of move back into that favorite spot. I still would have Barron at number 2 in the region. I'm not sure after that, to be honest with you. Heck, I might have Metcalfe County number 3 just because they can score.
They can score, and I haven't seen a lot of teams that can score 1 through 5. All 5 of their kids that they throw out on the floor can make shots, and that's a big asset.
Yeah,
I would throw Russell County as probably in the top 5 because with Star Markham back, I think that moves them back into the play.
Yeah, but they are also just erratic at the moment. Even with her back,
they are, but that's kind of sums up everybody is fairly erratic.
That's true. Meanwhile, on the boys' side, Bowling Green beat Ashland Blazer, I think, by 30, almost 30 on Saturday.
They're arguably the best team in the state.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who have decided to move them up, especially after their last couple of results that were so decisive against teams that were in the state tournament last year and thought to have a run this year.
I would just be sweating bullets if I was associated with Bowling Green boys, just for the COVID deal.
Yeah.
Because I think that outside of a major injury, and I don't want that to happen to anybody, but that, to me, could be the only thing that could set them back. I do think Warren Central is what's new. They're really good again.
Right.
They're just young.
Yeah.
But Coach Unseld has talked fairly openly about maybe the best shooting team he's ever had. They're just inexperienced, a lot of sophomores, so that's probably their threat.
Yeah.
Again, same old. It's probably their biggest threat in the region is, Warren Central.
Well, we flash back. Was it Barron County that they hit 13 threes against last year when they weren't as good at shooting? And most of those guys who were shooters last year are actually back.
Yeah.
With the exception of, I think, Kobe Brents. All the rest of their best shooters were the younger guys. Meanwhile, the Clinton County boys are 11-1. Talking about getting in games, I think they've played 12. I think that's the most of anybody in the region. That's one more, I think, than Barron has played. So it's kind of amazing when you look at some of these teams that have actually gotten in so many games at this point. So, in Clinton County, we expect them to be good, but I'm with you. right now, there's probably no one close to Bowling Green just generally. They probably are the best team in the state.
I think so.
All right, it's Brown Sports Bag brought to you by McDonald's of Glasgow. We'll be right back.
Presented by McDonald's of Glasgow, it's back to the studio with James and John, the Brown Sports Bag.
Well, John, as we talked at the top of the show, rather amazingly, this coming Sunday is the Super Bowl. It does feel very quiet leading up to the Super Bowl. I mean, it's just usually there's some sort of nonsense controversy that has already started by now. But there hasn't been one. I guess maybe this is the year where everybody decides nonsense controversies just aren't worth the time anymore. That'd be nice.
Yeah, it would be. I mean, Kansas City's not going to fly in until the day before. Of course, they're normally, with Super Bowl, you're required to be there a week early.
Yeah.
Because of the COVID rules. Of course, Tampa Bay's there because they're hosting.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's been
they just got off the ship and went down to the field.
Yeah, it's been relatively quiet for a Super Bowl, but I'll be honest with you, I never have liked it doesn't interest me, the build up to a Super Bowl. It doesn't, all that stuff doesn't interest me. I am looking forward to the game.
Yeah. The only things that ever really interested me about the build-up to the Super Bowl was when the foreign reporters would come in and ask questions of players that were usually just the most I like the oddball questions a lot more than the old standard stuff. I guess I do find that entertaining about the Super Bowl because sometimes the players are playing along with it, and they're pretty entertaining in their own right, and it's a little bit more loosey-goosey. But yeah, the extra stuff I'm not all that entertained by. But I am looking forward to this game. And one of the things I'm looking forward to is, these two teams, the Chiefs and the Bucs, played on November 29th, and the Chiefs beat them 27-24. The Bucs scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, but otherwise Hill and Patrick Mahomes basically dominated the game up until that point. And I'm curious to see what kind of adjustments the Bucs make in order to try to slow down the Chiefs in this game, John.
Well, I'm sure they'll make some. I mean, you can't. I don't know how you slow down Patrick Mahomes per se.
Yeah.
And what you do with Tyreek Hill, he's such a fast player. Because if you double team him, you leave open Travis Kelce, their tight end. So I mean, they've got 2 weapons that are better at their position than about anybody else. To be perfectly honest with you, but Tampa Bay can score too. I mean, and their defensive, front played really well against Green Bay.
Yeah.
I don't think it's any help at all to host the Super Bowl, to be honest with you, because I think Tampa Bay lost 3 times this year at home. They were better on the road anyway, so I don't think that's a factor in any way. It's I wrote down 31-27 Kansas City.
That's an interesting score. I'll tell you this.
The line is 3.
Yeah, I'll tell you this. The only game I think in the last 2 months that the Chiefs in the last 2 months, and I'm just excluding the game where none of their players played at the end of the season.
Right.
The only game in the last 2 months, 2 games in the last 2 months that they scored over 30 points actually was the win in the conference final and the loss to the Raiders. Their offense has not been as prolific as it was last year. But then again, at the same time, that's got to be a factor of, as they say in the NFL, as time goes on, people start to figure out what you're doing, and they're better able to defend it.
I think their offense is as prolific. They don't score as many points. What I mean by that is that the opposing team is taking away their deep threat as much as possible. So
they're getting more field goals and less touchdowns.
Instead of scoring within like 1 minute of getting the ball, sometimes it takes them 6 or 7.
Yeah,
because they're taking away those long throws. I watched every Kansas City game this year because Patrick Mahomes was my fantasy football quarterback, and Travis Kelce was on my team.
Interest, huh?
and I've never seen so many long drives.
Yeah.
I mean, they basically took away. They probably didn't have 3 touchdowns over 40 yards this year.
Yeah,
and that is with Tyreek Hill.
I think the flip side of what that does 2 things though. One is it allows the other team to stay in the game because or at least feel like they're still in the game because they're within some form of striking distance. As we've seen, they went 14-2, and actually they went 14-1 in the regular season, throwing out that last game because you still can't quite get there. They still have the ability to finish games with their offense. as we've seen in the playoffs.
Well, they got the best player in the game.
Yeah.
I mean, Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes, either one. But he's an incredible player.
Yeah.
Of course, Tampa Bay's got a pretty good quarterback too.
Yeah, but I don't think he's necessarily the key.
Okay.
I actually think the key is their forefront guys on the defense, because they have actually, to me, been the key to their success in the second half of the season. And that's not taken away from Tom Brady, but even when he threw 3 interceptions in the second half against Green Bay, their defense made sure they didn't pay for it.
That's true. The only thing I would say that they went 7-9 last year with the same defensive front, and with Jameson Winston throwing the ball 30 times the other team.
Well, look, I think what that says is don't throw the ball 30 times to the other team.
Yeah,
I'm not calling Tom Brady a game manager as a quarterback.
No,
he's still
not.
Tom Brady.
Yeah, he threw for 43 touchdowns. But you're right. I mean, the key to this game will be it's probably the pressure. Tom Brady does not like to be hit anymore either.
No.
So the pressure put on Tom Brady, and can Tampa Bay put enough pressure on Patrick Mahomes? So Mahomes gets away from pressure,
right,
and he makes more plays than Tom Brady does outside the pocket.
Right.
And
than Tom Brady ever did, really.
Yeah, but Brady's good at getting away from pressure in the pocket. I mean, he's subtle in his movement. But Patrick Mahomes is just at a different level. And if you have to gain 11 yards on the ground for a first down on 3rd and 11, Mahomes can scramble and get that.
Well, and that's the other thing about the Chiefs. As I was watching this thing, and they were talking about the traditional thing of, get 3 yards on first down so you can set up more second down plays, whatever, or 4 or 5 or whatever. The first down play is critical for what comes second and third down. For the Chiefs, it doesn't matter. They have negative plays or 0 plays on first and second down. They'll wind up with 3rd and 12 and get a first down. And they're unique in that factor. It just doesn't usually work that way in professional football, but they negate that whole theory of what you have to do on first down. And that just seems to open up their playbook, because they're never at risk of not getting a first down or converting a play.
You're right. No, it's because of that quarterback.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's because of that quarterback, and because you can put Tyreek Hill. You can put Tyreek Hill in the slot, tell him take 3 steps, take a right turn, and I'm gonna throw you the ball, and you can pick up 15 yards.
True.
I mean, it's just a combination of those things.
And it's still remarkable that Tom Brady's going for his 7th Super Bowl.
Oh yeah, yeah.
This is his 11th or 10th?
Well, I guess it would be his 11th.
It is remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, and he's 43 years old. I think we just kind of lose sight of that.
Right.
He's 43. I mean, he doesn't play like it at all. I mean, his arm strength is, I think people are starting to question a little bit at Kansas City. It may be because he was playing in 15-degree weather.
Yeah.
But his arm strength is incredible. I mean, he looks like he can play 2 or 3 more years. I mean, it just doesn't. He's incredible. I know that with modern medicine and things like that, the 40 today is like 50 used to be or whatever. Yeah. But he's still. I mean, he's incredible.
Yeah, and like I said, I wasn't referring to him as a game manager, but I do think that this team is akin to the Denver team with Peyton Manning in the sense that. Well, let me back up real quick. The Super Bowl that Denver won with Peyton Manning at quarterback, there were 2 plays in that first quarter that Peyton Manning made, not because of what his actual physical tools were, but because he knew what was going to happen before the ball was ever snapped, and he could make the play.
True, but Peyton Manning, he wasn't near the player that Brady was that year, because he was coming off that neck surgery, and he couldn't throw it 30 yards down the field hardly.
But my point being, so that touchdown that they had against the Packers at the end of the first half, the reason they were able to get that touchdown is because Tom Brady saw what was happening before the ball was ever snapped. So he got it. He could throw it the 53 yards necessary. And that's the thing that is the critical difference, because Tampa Bay has a good defense and Tom Brady can beat you with his mind before the ball is ever snapped. And I guess that's going to be to me, that's the interesting thing about this game, is that chess match between what Tampa Bay wants to try to do on defense versus Patrick Mahomes versus what they can do on defense against Tom Brady.
I think I'm right. The defensive coordinator for Kansas City was the defensive coordinator for the Giants, who beat him twice in the Super Bowl.
Well, I mean, he has
Steve Spagnolia.
Yeah, that's right.
So maybe he knows something too.
He knows something. He does know that he doesn't have David Tyree to catch the ball against his helmet on
the defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I know. I'm
okay,
just
all right.
out,
Defense.
I'm just pointing out the miracle plays
Yeah.
or the touchdown pass to Plaxico Burress in the back of the end zone.
That's true.
But yes, no, he did a good job against the Patriots both times they saw him in the Super Bowl. And I don't doubt that he'll do a good job.
He obviously has a feel.
Yes.
I mean, he's not clueless or whatever.
Right. Well, I'd also say another critical part is we've talked about all the skill players on the Chiefs side of the.
It'll probably come down to an extra point or a field goal.
Maybe. But, the other thing, though, is it might come down to Jones and it may come down to Tyrann Mathieu making plays because that's what we've also seen. We saw this last year in the playoffs. We've seen this year. They have guys on their defense.
And Tom Brady has put the ball up for interceptions a little bit more than normal too. Now, part of it's because the offense is a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah.
And they throw the ball down the field more than probably I know that they did at New England. Mm-hmm. So there is some opportunities for some interceptions, especially to get some pressure on him.
Yeah, I would say you don't want to throw a wounded duck though to Tyrann Mathieu because it's probably going for 6.
Pretty good.
He's pretty explosive. So what'd you say, 31-27?
I said 31-27 Kansas City.
All right. I'm actually going to take the Bucs, John.
Okay.
I'm going to take 28-27 down to an extra point.
1 point.
Yep. I'm going to take the Bucs by 1.
Well, Kansas City is a 3-point favorite.
Yeah, and they should be. I mean, until they've been so dominant offensively and just all around the last 2 years that there's no point for them not to be the favorite, to be honest.
Oh, they should be the favorite, no question about it. But I could see 28-27. That wouldn't shock me. I would never bet against Tom Brady.
Yeah.
I wouldn't also bet against Patrick Mahomes.
Isn't it strange?
So I'm probably not going to bet then.
Yeah, I'm the most betted event ever, and you kind of like the gambling stuff a little bit.
I like to talk about it. Yeah, I mean, I definitely like that aspect is. It's interesting to me because the Vegas lines are so accurate. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's amazing how accurate they are when it comes to these things.
Yeah,
I mean, they're just rarely way off. And the line has just been, it got up to 3.5 early, and it has been stuck at 3. Mm-hmm. And I can't see it changing much. There was a guy who was that went into I think it was the MGM Grand in Vegas last week. That bet it was on the radio and everything. Bet 2.3 million on Tampa. 2.3
million.
2.3 million.
Hey, if
took Tampa, and now he may have been part of a conglomerate or whatever, but I was surprised they even took the bet, but they took it.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, I wouldn't sleep real well. Would you?
If I had 2.3 million, betting would be the last thing I'd be doing.
Oh my God! Can you imagine?
how
can that be even fun?
I don't know. Look,
if I bet $2, I would be squirmy. 2.3 million.
All of my friends know that I am averse to gambling.
Yeah.
I tell them, they're like, you don't like to gamble? I'm like, man, the only thing I'm putting my money on is a sure thing, and the only sure thing I know of is keep it in my bank.
Yep.
So, yeah, I just no, I can't.
2.3.
Yeah, that's a lot of money, John. And these days the irony is it's not really a lot of money in some circles.
Yeah, in some circles, you're right.
Yeah. I listen to the Bill Simmons podcast, and he talks about gambling all the time. And the one he had talking about the Super Bowl this week is each year they do all the prop bet things that are in the Super Bowl, about like how long the national anthem will be and all the different stuff of that nature.
Who gets the first TD?
Touchdown? Yeah. I do love that just because I find it amusing, but at the same time, it sounds to me sort of like they need some AA with their gambling. If those are all your options out there.
Well, Vegas was not built on losers. It was not bet on people winning bets.
No. It was built on sure things.
Yeah, sure things that go wrong.
That's right. All right, it's Brown Sports Bag. We'll be right back.
Presented by McDonald's of Glasgow, it's back to the studio with James and John, the Brown Sports Bag.
Well, John, on to a sport where people probably wager money, but it's probably kind of an odd thing. College basketball, and actually going to start off with women's basketball.
Probably.
They bet a lot of money,
yes,
but it's an irony to bet a lot of money on amateur sports, isn't it? Anyway, we're going to start off with women's college basketball because there's a huge game tonight.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock between the Louisville Cardinals and NC State. Their number was 1 and 2.
Well, NC State, I think, dropped to 4.
Oh, did they drop to 4?
Yeah, they lost their last game. Their best player did not play. She's been in quarantine or whatever. But
Gotcha.
She's playing tonight.
Okay, I was looking at the poll. I guess it was the one published yesterday where it had the schedule. But, yeah, Louisville's undefeated. NC State has lost 1. They've lost 2 games in. Or that was their first loss.
Their first loss.
Okay, so, yeah, they may actually still be at number 2 then. So that's a big game tonight between those two in the ACC. And as you just mentioned, their best player did not play in that particular game, but she will be back. And Louisville, they've had a couple of scrappy games. They had one they had to come back and win in order to. I think it was the first game after they were ranked number 1. But they've played well overall. They
have. They played well for the year. They've kind of hit a rough patch these last 3 games, and I think they're got a little fatigue. When they came back, they played a bunch of games in a row, and I think a little fatigue because Louisville does not have like overwhelming like UConn talent in the past or Baylor talent or that. I mean, they've got only one senior on the team, and she's really really good, but she's only like 5'6". Mm-hmm. And they start 2 freshmen, a little freshman guard, Van Leith, and a post player by the name of Cochran. So things have to work out quite well. They will not go undefeated. Louisville will get beat. They probably get beat tonight, to be perfectly honest with you. But they're going to run into some setbacks along the way. But they are so well coached. Jeff Walls is a great coach, and they shoot it well. They've got depth. They just don't have overwhelming talent, and so they're always vulnerable to get beat if they don't shoot it well or play real well. And it's on the road at North Carolina State. It would not surprise me at all if they lose.
Yeah, North Carolina State, you were right. They did drop to number 4 after that loss. Anyway, it's an interesting game for people who are interested in college basketball, and it's a good game to follow. And it's as we talked about a couple of weeks ago when that Louisville that was their first ever ranking at number 1, so they've managed to hold on to that despite the 3-game struggle that they had. So
yeah, I mean they were up 29 Thursday against North Carolina State. They were up 29 in the third, and North Carolina State actually came back and got it within 7.
Yeah,
and I think fatigue has been a little bit of a factor with them.
Right. Meanwhile, the WKU women won a gritty game on Friday night.
It's one of the best games. I watched it on TV. It was one of the better games I've watched. 100-99, I think.
Yeah, in triple overtime.
Triple overtime. In Meryl Abdagawad made a huge shot, 3 at the buzzer to win it in triple overtime.
Right.
And then they came back and beat Charlotte the next night on a Raneem El-Jadawi 3.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, 2 big wins against a Charlotte team who was actually undefeated in the conference. They were 4-0 in the conference. So, I mean, that just tells you, what one player can do in basketball. Mm-hmm. They did not have El-Jadawi until about 3 weeks ago, and she came back from Egypt, and, she has – not only can she score and she rebounds, she's averaging a double-double, but it settles everybody else down.
Yeah.
And, their 2 freshman guards are playing really well. Mm-hmm. One, the guard from Mercy and the girl from, I think, South Laurel, or maybe it's North Laurel.
Yeah.
And they're becoming more and more comfortable. And all of a sudden, and still really struggling to do anything, they're starting to look like a team that's got the capability of being a decent team by the end of the year.
Yeah, they've had real struggles to this point. But, yeah, that was huge. It was a huge win for them to win in the conference, but I imagine it was a huge win for them to overcome the earlier struggles and gain some confidence of what they're capable of doing. And really doing it 2 nights in a row is just incredible.
One player can make a big difference in basketball.
Yeah.
Does not make outside of the quarterback in football, does not make that big of a – you can't win with one player in football or one player in baseball. Mm-hmm. Basketball, one player is a huge because basketball, you play both ends. You don't come out, like in football, you only play offense or defense in the pros in college. And in baseball, 1 out of 9.
Right.
But basketball, one player has such an impact on the dynamics of both the offensive end and defensive end, and it's just a huge factor.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the Louisville Cardinals earlier today got a win over Georgia Tech, a pretty decisive win before it was all said and done.
Yeah, he played well. Again, Louisville's guards are the two guards, David Johnson and Jones they're really, really good. The question with Louisville's not a great team. They're just borderline good. It's just going to depend on the improvement of some of the other players. Mm-hmm. And they need that one kid back. I've just forgotten the 6'10" player, Williams, who's been out all year. He should be back in another 2 weeks. Yeah, and he's a good player.
Yeah, meanwhile, the Hilltoppers' run of wins in Conference USA came to an end mostly absolutely because they didn't get to play.
They didn't get to play. Old Dominion had COVID issues, and I think they tried to reschedule it for this Tuesday and Wednesday, and they
ODU said no thank you, basically.
Said no thank you. I don't know if they're not fully healthy or what, but Western's ready to go. And,
yeah.
And, it's you don't want to take 2 weeks off of basketball.
No. Well, and isn't it strange? I mean, that's conference games. You would think that the conference itself would have some sort of coordination to try to work these things out.
Yeah, I would think it wouldn't be ODU's
call
decision
necessarily.
Yeah. I mean, are you healthy now?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, you're going to play
right
on Tuesday or Wednesday.
Well, and the Hilltoppers were willing to play Tuesday and Wednesday and turn around and play whatever series they've got this coming weekend as well.
Right.
I mean, so it's just strange that Old Dominion would be like, nah, I don't think so. I mean, and like I said, it's just so odd that the conference doesn't have any kind of hand in any of this that's going on. I mean, it's just, I don't know. That whole situation just turned out to be peculiar, but by the time it was all said and done.
I agree.
And then the Kentucky game with Texas got canceled
Saturday.
Yeah, and then
they lost the previous game to Alabama, right?
Yes, that's right. And then, I mean, talking about being off, they're not going to be quite 2 weeks, but they're not playing again until I think they play Missouri on Wednesday.
Be a tough one.
Yeah, that'll be a tough one. I mean, and so it's just the women's game's rolling along. The men's game is a little bit up in the air.
Well, who would think in February 1st, 2021, and Duke, Kentucky, North Carolina, and now we can add Kansas is all falling out of the top 25.
Yeah.
And Indiana. We can throw them in. But
they've been out for a while.
They've been out for a while, but, that's blue bloods right there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's I'm sad for them, I'm sure.
I can tell.
But at the same time, I'm glad as well. I mean, I kind of, out of all the stuff related to COVID, and this went back to college football as well, the thing that I was most interested in was to see what kind of disruption it had for these programs that have been on cruise control in so many ways. And they've, outside of Alabama football, it's been a huge deal for most of these, all these other programs.
Well, I guess it's kind of neat. We complain, at least I complained in football, it's the same old teams. Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, and then throw in Notre Dame and occasional LSU, Oklahoma. I mean, it's boring to me.
It is.
College basketball is, you can look at it one sense, well, there's some new blood.
Yeah.
A little bit. I mean, Gonzaga's not new blood, and but they're a legitimate threat. Baylor, it looks like those two are the best two teams. I like Villanova is good. Yeah. I think Alabama's good. I know they lost at Oklahoma, but I kind of like their team.
Yeah.
And that'd be new. Iowa's new. Hadn't heard of a lot about Iowa basketball, and they play a fun style.
Yeah.
So when the big 4 or 5 are down, it gives other teams an opportunity.
Yeah, I think it makes for an interesting time whenever the brackets start coming out for the tournament. I mean, I know we got an initial bracketology last week, which was kind of the typical in a lot of ways, and so I was kind of disappointed in what I saw out of it. But I do think it makes for an interesting discussion when the committee gets together and starts trying to put together these brackets. It could be an interesting tournament, not just because of how it's going to be played and where it's going to be played, but because of the teams.
I know we're homers, but don't you think Western's one of the top 68 teams in the country?
They have to be. I mean, there's just no way around it.
And let's knock that off because you got the conference tournaments and winners are a factor in that. But I think Western's one of the top 32 teams in the country.
This is a year where I would say if they put all this weight related to who wins the tournament, they've done it wrong. I will have the same feeling about the way they put together the brackets as I did when they revealed the 4 teams playing in the college
And are they
football.
going to give conference tournament? I guess you're still going to give conference tournament automatic buys. I guess they're not going to change that. But what if the best teams in those tournaments opt out of the conference tournaments?
Well, and that's what I'm saying is like I think
if Gonzaga doesn't play in theirs and everybody else, some sorry team wins, I guess they're in.
Well,
that hurts Western.
Well, it does, but here's the other thing about that. I think you would have to factor in not whether they would opt out, but let's say that a team enters the tournament and then they have to quarantine and it's the number 1 team or number 2 team. I do think you would then have to factor in how that tournament plays out thereafter, because that's going to affect the bracket of the tournament. And those are things that they're going to have to consider, but I don't think those things being considered should punish other teams. Meaning, just because, Kentucky wins the SEC tournament, let's say, but they're 15-15, that doesn't elevate somebody else in the SEC. Actually should punish them if their team lost in the first round or whatever, more severely, probably. But if they had players who didn't play, then they're going to have to consider that, because that team's better than the one you saw in that tournament. And that would be true for Western as well, or however that pans out. I think all those things have to be considered. And if they're overlooked, or if they're just somebody changes the rules on the last day so that somebody can make sure they can still get in the tournament.
Well, they did that in football.
They did. If they do that in college basketball, it's going to really train wreck a lot of thoughts on how that all functions.
Yeah, they did that. Ohio State was basically
which is why
given a pass.
That's why I referred to that whole thing as a fraud, because that's
right.
I felt like that was a fraudulent act. Anyway, this is Brown Sports Bag, brought to you by McDonald's of Glasgow. We'll be right back.
Presented by McDonald's of Glasgow, it's back to the studio with James and John, the Brown Sports Bag.
Well, John, a topic we did not get to last week that was one of the topics that we could have gotten to was the death of Hank Aaron. And, there are so many things, I think, associated with Hank Aaron beyond just baseball, like as an ambassador on so many levels, not just for black folks in the country, but fans of baseball and fans of civil rights, or, I don't know, purveyors of civil rights. And so, he kind of bridges a lot of areas for a lot of people, John, even beyond baseball.
Yeah, great. He was what was amazing about Hank Aaron was I consider him, I think a lot of people consider him still the all-time leading home run hitter, 714.
Yeah.
Though Barry Bonds later surpassed him, but of course that's the steroid era and so forth like that. But
some questions.
Very much questions, to be honest with you. But
yeah.
But, Hank Aaron accumulated all those home runs, and he never had one of those, 50 home run years.
Mm-hmm.
He was consistently 35, 40 for year after year after year after year, and he's still, I think I'm right, the all-time leader in Major League Baseball with RBIs.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm right on that one, over 3,000 hits and so forth. But the thing that I remember about Hank Aaron, and I was young, I just remember vaguely Hank Aaron as a player, but his demeanor was so impressive. He was calm, he was level-headed, and he took a lot of crap early in his life. A ton of crap. And but he handled himself during his career, and actually his post-career was just so much dignity. That's what I liked about him. He was not a complainer. He was just such a dignified person. Even when it appeared that, when his home run title was kind of taken away from him by Barry Bonds, he never really complained. You could tell he was never really I don't think he had a whole lot of respect for that, to be perfectly honest with you, but he never really threw Barry Bonds under the bus or anything like that. But he was such a dignified person that came around at a time that we really needed probably somebody as a leader at that time in the game.
Yeah, one of the things that
he never hit monster home runs either. He just hit it long enough.
They just got over the fence.
He did, just hit it long enough.
he's recognized for his hitting and whatnot, but I mean, he was just a great all-around baseball player beyond just those numbers. One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting back in the fall, it was announced that the Negro League stats would be included in the historical record for Major League Baseball. And, one of the things that kind of happens sometimes, going back to the Hank Aaron part of this, is we recognize the accomplishments of Hank Aaron in Major League Baseball, but at the same time, so many players were overlooked who would have had, if they'd had the opportunity that was paved by Jackie Robinson. And I guess it was paved by Jackie Robinson. He set a certain standard, and I think part of what you're talking about with Hank Aaron is that he also set a standard that allowed people who didn't look like Hank Aaron to recognize the skill and abilities of those folks.
Well, he kind of crossed the color barrier.
Yeah.
I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I mean, there was nothing he was such a good guy and dignified person that, it was from a race perspective, he kind of crossed the like I said, that part of it, and I still think it's amazing looking back on the home run that broke Babe Ruth's record.
Mm-hmm.
The people running while he's running the bases, and he has people from the stands coming out and patting him on the back as he's running the bases. That's just looking back on that after 9/11. With all the threats and things like that. You would never even think about letting people run out on the field and do things like that. But back that time, that was what was going on.
Well, and the funny thing is, I mean, he told the story.
I mean, he could have slugged somebody if he wanted to.
Well, he was terrified. He didn't know why those guys were running on the field.
But he didn't. He didn't. That's what a gentleman he really was.
Yeah, I mean,
I love his interviews too.
Yeah.
All his interviews, especially after he retired, was just so gracious. And Pete Rose was my all-time favorite player growing up.
Yeah.
But Hank Aaron was up there as well because Pete and Hank obviously are in two colossal different places.
Yeah.
But they were both great baseball players. But Hank a little bit more, I would say, humble than Pete.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, you're talking about the interviews. I mean, contrasting in so many different ways would be Pete Rose and Hank Aaron. But back to with Major League Baseball saying that they're going to, recognize the Negro League stats as part of the historical record of stats, that opens the door for a lot of folks who probably haven't received the recognition that they deserved because of the quality of play they put out there. Because if you kind of look at it this way, people would say, the Negro Leagues were the lesser league because you didn't have the players from Major League Baseball playing there. But that can be looked at conversely as well.
Sure.
Because the best players weren't necessarily playing in the major leagues either. And folks like Jackie Robinson and Hank Aaron and so many more. I mean, just mentioning, Barry Bonds, for that matter. I mean, he comes along later, but his dad was one of the early pioneers in terms of transition and setting a standard for the quality of play that's available. You look at Barry Bonds, I mean, we can question his later part of his career, whether or not it was human growth hormones and that kind of stuff or steroids, and there are questions about that kind of thing for him. But, I mean, early in his career, he was a great baseball player.
Sure.
I mean, it's just a shame that became the 90s, that became the thing, having to keep up with the Joneses by, doping and whatnot.
Well, Hank, the last thing I'll say about Hank Aaron is there's great players and there's icons.
Yeah.
And Hank Aaron is an icon. Babe Ruth, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, those people are Mickey Mantle are like icons in the sport. I mean, they go beyond the sport in terms of a lot of things. And, Muhammad Ali, I mean, you're talking about these are icons, and Hank Aaron falls in that. And what separates him from some of the others I just mentioned, Babe Ruth and people like that, was, I think, the dignity he had off the field.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed his interviews. It's sort of like I've always enjoyed Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's interviews.
Yeah, he's a very thoughtful person. Yeah,
and it's just, I mean, he had such a surly. Hank Aaron didn't have this. He was considered to be
Kareem much different off the basketball court.
Yeah. Well, he's considered to be a pretty surly individual, but his interviews kind of enlighten you that he just was in a different kind of world.
That's correct.
And even Henry Aaron was that way in a lot of ways. It's just that they had a different approach about it.
Yep.
All right, it's Brown Sports Bag brought to you by McDonald's Glasgow. We'll be back next week.
Thanks for listening, and be sure and join James and John once again next Monday at 4 for the Brown Sports Bag, a local weekly sports machine presented by McDonald's of Glasgow.
Coming soon to your FM dial, this is Fox Sports Radio, WCDS Glasgow, AM 1230.